The Africa Climate Summit is coming 2 months after the fourth Financing for Development conference that took place in Sevilla, Spain, and culminated in the Compromiso de Sevilla, articulating some important reforms of the global financial system. Of critical importance are sections 47 to 57 of the document, touching on debt sustainability, and particularly Section 50F on initiating an intergovernmental process on global debt reforms. This is an important call for African countries for several reasons. The current debt driven development amidst multiple crises, including climate emergencies and the pressures of energy transition, comes at a moment when the global debt and financial architecture are heavily skewed against Africa. This includes adverse credit ratings that sends out negative market signals which limit the ability of African countries to access the finance required for development. African countries are also faced with high interest rates, with the average cost of borrowing about 10 times higher when compared to countries like the United States of America and Germany. The system imposes structural inequalities which favor creditor interest at the expense of borrowing countries. It is heavily guided by terms and conditionalities that impose austerity on countries. This is also marked by painfully slow debt restructuring initiatives, often too little and too late, to give countries the fiscal space needed to finance their development and face climate emergencies, as well as the push for energy transition. Africa remains at the base of the global economy, providing mainly raw materials, which means they are commodity dependent. The economies are commodity dependent, and it's a setup that is reminiscent of the legacies of slavery and colonialism. And this locks African nations into cycles of exploitation, degradation, debt and injustice, with the failing promise of extractive led development and high incidence of illicit financial flows out of the continent that amount to about 90 billion US dollars, according to an UNCTAD report in 2022. From case studies like Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Democratic Republic of Congo, we see that instead of prosperity, extractives, especially fossil fuel extraction, has deepened inequalities, destroyed the environment, and mortgaged the future of many African countries. The failure of the global financial architecture to provide uh, adequate access to finance has seen countries turning to resource backed loans and collateralization. A recent study by Aphrodite shows that about 30 resource backed loans were signed in the years between 2004 rather to 2008, with Angola being the biggest country which issued resource backed loans amounting to about 49 billion, as well as Ghana with resource backed loans amounting to about 25 billion US dollars. The high incidence of resource backed loans can also be attributed to the high cost of capital for African countries, as well as the inhibiting conditionalities of accessing capital imposed by the current financial architecture. So, for instance, private debt in the form of bonds, which attract the highest interest rates, have grown significantly in recent years as a share of external debt, moving from just about 20% in the early 2000s to about 45% today. So today, 10 of the most highly indebted countries globally are found in Africa, and the most mineral resource rich and mineral intensive countries are also found here. This is a tale of resource enclaves and debt traps in one. I mean, this tale of resource enclaves and debt traps is well explored. For instance, African countries who have contributed to at least just about 4% of greenhouse gas emissions are most vulnerable to the fallouts of climate change, notably governments due to high external debt repayments rates have already very few resources to act swiftly in the face of the climate, and other climate disasters and other crises. In the midst of this, we have seen initiatives like the Service Suspension Initiative and the G20 Common Framework failing to provide solutions, and with countries like Zambia, Ethiopia, and Chad struggling in having their debt restructured through this initiative. So only four African countries thus far have expressed interest in having their debt restructured or addressed through this initiative because of the weaknesses of the common framework. So this comes back to the need to fix the global financial architecture, picking up from Section 50F of the Sevilla Outcome Document and Section 44 of the Lome Declaration by African states for a process that should lead to a UN Framework Convention on Debt. The initiation of this process will include a Global South mobilization, including a role by the African Union, the G77 plus China group, which is the biggest group of countries at the United Nations. Uh, Initiating the process requires demands leadership, from African countries, as we saw in the case of Nigeria on the UN Framework Convention on Tax. This involves inclusive engagements and dealing with resistance and denial, which can only be overcome through political mobilization across the board among governments, civil society, the media, and academia. So today we talk of overcoming the climate crisis and engaging in energy transition, but this will only be achieved by reforming the current financial system to provide access to resources at scale without pushing countries into debt distress. Oh, as we meet at the sidelines of the Africa Climate Summit this week, it is important to have these issues as key points of discussions, key points of consideration for our advocacy agenda, for political mobilization, for international cooperation, for the collaboration between governments and civil society to make sure that African countries are at a position where they are dealing with a fair international financial system that does not keep pushing African countries into recurrent cycles of indebtedness as we have experienced in the past decades.